Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio, and this is part 2 of a special Middle East edition of City Talk. Like all good soap operas, we need a minute to bring you back to the action. Last week, Ambassador Richard Murphy took us on a tour of the Middle East. We visited Iraq and Iran, we talked Arab and Islam, Sunni and Shia, and an Arab Spring. Stay tuned for the next episode. With me is Ambassador Richard Murphy, a long-time and distinguished Middle East hand. He served as U.S. Ambassador to Mauritania, Syria, the Philippines, and Saudi Arabia, and served as Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs during the Reagan years. During this time, he was particularly active in the Arab-Israeli peace process. He is a frequent TV commentator and widely consulted expert on things Middle East. Welcome back.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Let's this week focus on Israel and Palestine. We'll look at Lebanon, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and then, in a sense, wrap it all up again. Let's turn to Israel and Palestine. Within the next couple of months, we expect to see a dismantling of the settlements in the Gaza and Israeli withdrawal. The first, I guess, recent physical move on this quote-unquote road to peace. Mm-hmm. Talk about the prospects of this actually happening and its promises and what we expect to happen. What's plausible here?
Well, I think you go back to two events. One was the death of Yassir Arafat last fall, then the election to bring Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, into office as president of the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinians are they've had municipal elections, they're going to have legislative elections, I think, in June. So there is a...
And these were real elections insofar as they were contested elections for specific offices.
Right. There was no serious contest for the presidency,
right,
but definitely in the municipal level there was, and there will be in the Legislative Council, because there's very sharp disagreements within the Palestinian community, not about whether there should be an independent and viable state, as we've described the future, but how it should be run and what role the various factions have in it. Mm-hmm. So, in fact, the earlier elections that brought Arafat the presidency some years back were free. I remember Jimmy Carter traveling there and saying these were the freest elections he knew of in the region. Now, where are they going? They have a new leadership, and Israel has this new idea, which is started out as unilateral withdrawal from Gaza. Aric Sharon's program. He wasn't going to discuss it with Arafat. He wasn't going to negotiate with Arafat. He was sick to death of the kind of talks that had gone on over the years. He was going to move and laid out the program, which is to be finished, I believe his goal is the end of this summer. Evacuate the few thousands of Israeli settlers from Gaza, where they sit as a tiny, tiny percentage in the over 1.3 million, I believe, Palestinians.
9,000 out of 1.3?
9,000 out of 1.3, 1.4 million, yeah.
But they're determined.
They're determined, and they're there. Many of them are what we would term the religious settlers. They're not the economic settlers. They're there because, it's been a good life economically and socially, but they're there basically because it's the will of God. This is
part of the chosen land.
It's theirs by divine will, but that flame burns even brighter and hotter on the West Bank than it does in Gaza.
Okay, let's stick with Gaza and let's move to the West Bank. What is it that we're likely to see here?
You're likely to see a lot of physical resistance to the closing of those settlements. God willing, it won't turn violent in terms of gunfire, because the last thing that either side really wants is a shootout.
But there's a potential for that here.
There is a potential in that there are extremists there, and they pay no heed to what mere politicians want. They've got their guidance.
Right.
And they thought they could trust Sharon. Now they've decided they can't trust Sharon. They never trusted Rabin or Perez or any of the others. Just politicians.
Right.
Sharon seemed to be an exception now. He's joined the other politicians in the views of the settlers.
But bottom line, they're going to be moved, and those settlements are going to be destroyed.
They will be moved. Whether the settlements themselves are physically destroyed, we'll see.
Okay.
But
they would be then turned over to the Palestinians?
Would be turned over to the Palestinians. I mean, there is an economic future there for the in the agricultural scene, for the greenhouses that the Israeli settlers have built.
I can see the settlers torching this stuff, but go ahead.
It could happen. But the concern is that there's a certain element in the rabbinate in Israel that has been saying to Israeli soldiers, do not obey the orders to go in and evacuate those settlers. And that makes a lot of
secular split.
Very, very uneasy.
I was unaware of that.
Yeah. And I don't think that's going to win the day for them, but it's unsettling the Israeli population as a whole. The idea that the Israeli army would be challenged and its soldiers would be challenged when carrying out orders.
Okay. West Bank now.
West Bank, Sharon has pledged to close out 4 of the small outposts that have been, among others, put up since he became prime minister back in 2001. You will see definitely a very serious mobilization of opposition on the part of the settlers to each one of those 4. While Gaza, they will resist as a test case, as a first line, they're going to really dig in on those 4 outposts. But
for what reason? What makes?
Well, that is the land of Israel, as they see it. Again,
this
it's
is
the
deeply
religious
religious.
guidance. Yeah, very much so.
Okay. What's likely to happen there? I mean,
I think they'll be out of those 4 outposts, and then this is just personal prediction. Underline it. I don't have any inside information, but I can see Sharon going to elections next spring, and that his message would be along the lines, well, we've done our part, now it's for the Palestinians to show that they will confront the violent elements in their own society, they will shut down the acts of terrorism against Israel, and until they've done that, we'll just hold the line. We will continue to build that wall to close off Israel from the West Bank, and just stay in place.
So we're talking about both a metaphoric and a literal walling off. Yeah. What is the American role here? Well, I mean, what is the American role? What is the role of the Soviet Union? Because Putin's been in the region, in Israel and in Egypt. What is the role of the EU, the UN? What happens here, or what could happen here?
Well, there is the quartet that was an American idea a few years back to put together Russia, the United States, the EU, and the Secretary General of the UN to work towards the resumption of negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis. The roadmap, series of milestones laid out in process, how you get back to the negotiating table. And there's been no negotiations, as you know, for the last several years, and a pretty hot rebellion, the Intifada, the second Intifada, which started back in 2000. Now there's a truce of sorts. The religious, one of the religious groups, Hamas, has agreed to a ceasefire, but not open-ended, not forever. It's saying we've got to see the Israelis moving out, and they have never supported the idea of a 2-state solution. They want to see one state of Palestine. Well, that's the destruction of Israel as a Jewish state,
which is totally unacceptable.
Which isn't going to happen, right?
But is there a realization that it isn't going to happen?
Well,
and you've got to.
I think it's grown over the years.
Okay.
Some still can't articulate it on the Arab side,
right?
But I think yes, that Israel will survive and will be a Jewish state. I think is accepted by and large, and one day I can see if things move ahead towards statehood for the Palestinians, there will be an opposition in the Palestinian parliament, like there's an opposition in the Knesset. And just as who is it, Avigdor Lieberman, sits in the opposition benches
Right.
and will always be there. So Hamas may be always on the opposition bench in the Palestinian parliament, but inside the tent participating in the politics.
So what we're looking at down the road, sort of the strategic objective, if you will, is a secure Israel, not West Bank, not Gaza, and a coherent, contiguous Palestinian state, including the West Bank and including Gaza.
And viable. At the end of the
And
day, that it works.
Okay. How does one create this viable Palestinian nation, given the fact of its lack of physical infrastructure and, to a certain extent, social and civic infrastructure as well? Who provides it? How does this get built?
Well, there are institutions there, and we've, over the last several years, come to, as Americans, gotten used to the idea Palestinian equals terrorist. But Palestinian society is old, and Palestinian civil society, where the families have tried to get the kids the best possible education, get them up socially and economically, where political parties have not flourished because you've had this cult of the personality, which I'm afraid Arafat fostered. Now that era is past. There is no Arafat. Abu Mazen is not an Arafat. He doesn't command the sort of instinctive coalescence of all Palestinians behind him. Arafat had his critics, but he was Mr. Palestine. Right. This isn't the case with Abu Mazen. And nobody's getting any younger in that group that was with Arafat, so there's going to be a generational change one of these days.
Talk about this. What is that next generation, and what are their political orientations, and what are the prospects coming out of that?
They're a mixed bag. Some of them don't expect that the Israelis will ever willingly permit or foster a truly independent, viable Palestinian state, and some say, "Well, what's our choice? We've got to move ahead." They were starting to move ahead after the Oslo agreements in '93. Then the Intifada shut that down. So the institutions that were just starting to take root in terms of a national level government have to be restarted, and that's why you see a man of the stature of Jim Wolfenson, just out of the World Bank, right, now to coordinate the economic organization of the new state and to be, I'm sure, a focal point of fundraising efforts internationally. And I think the world is ready to be generous, but the world isn't ready to go through yet one more cycle of building and destruction of
what
its
signals to the world that cycle will not repeat itself? What are some of sort of the benchmark images that would convince the outside world that this has got reasonable prospects for success?
Well, as quiet a scene in terms of violence, inter-Israeli-Palestinian violence.
And that requires Abbas to really cut down the militias. I mean, there has to be exercised central control over the militias.
Yes, at the end of the day, there has to be. His way of looking at it is, I can't confront them, I can't gun them down, I can't cut them down, to use your word. I have to co-opt them.
And that would be preferable.
That would be preferable. Can he do it? Are they ready to be co-opted? How can Israel help that?
How can Israel help that?
Well, not by raising houses as terrorist families, etc., has been the policy over the last decades. Not by walling itself off from job seekers from the Palestinian side. They've got to, it's risky, but they've got to find a way to bring to the Palestinians a sense of real hope that there's a better future out there with economic development.
I mean, obviously, part of the problem is that these are huge gambles that don't look good when you lay the bet down.
Yeah.
What would be, in your mind, sort of the ideal end state, given all the practicalities here? Let's say 5 years down the road, what would be a reasonable expectation of a good case, if not a best case?
Well, it's a fair question. It's a very tough one to answer honestly.
That's why I'm asking you.
best case would be a state with the loyalty of its Palestinian citizenry, able to get the message across that there is a need to cease the violence and to devote our energies to development. And the best case will require, as I say, Israel reopening to the Palestinians, the world investing in the Palestinians, and the world coming together at some point in an international pledging conference to help resettle those Palestinians that want to get life started elsewhere.
What about guarantees for Israeli security, or the Israelis simply, doing what they have done in the past, provided for their own security?
The Israelis don't believe in international guarantees. Yeah. Even an American unilateral guarantee, I don't think, would cut much ice with the Israelis. They want to see it in the daily interaction between themselves and the Arab world. And they have, up to now, they have neglected that initiative, which was tabled at the Arab Summit back in Beirut in 3 years ago?
Right, 2002.
Which was that in return for, and it was two tough goals, withdrawal to the 1967 lines, which is really the armistice line of 1948, right, and a fair settlement of the Palestinian refugee issues, they would get normal relations with the entire Arab world. Well, they aren't going to withdraw to the 67 lines by any indication, and they don't know what a fair settlement of the Palestinian issue, refugee issue, will involve.
And then there's a third variable, isn't there? And that is Jerusalem as well. I mean, that seems to be another major stumbling block. Or am I misreading this?
No, you're not misreading it. It depends if you want to stumble or you want to step over it.
Go ahead.
There are ideas of how to manage the Jerusalem issue. I don't think that calling it simply the eternal capital of Israel and nobody else is going to work. I think there has to be a formula for sharing. These formulas are out there. They've been discussed. Look, all of the tough issues, Jerusalem, the settlements, refugees, water, and the borders, remain to be negotiated. Right. They can't be simply imposed by Israel or imposed by the UN or by Washington, Russia, whoever. They have to be negotiated. And there are ideas on each issue how to work it.
But we are at a point right now, or they are at a point right now, where there are these real positive possibilities. They may not bear fruit, but there is a blossoming of some type.
There's a blossoming, but is there enough pesticide to keep the infection from coming back into the area? Yeah.
Okay, and what role do we play?
Well,
meaning the United States.
I think we need to harness the energies of this quartet, and not try to play it just as the American peace process, which was the way in years past. And we need to be a leader in the fundraising for investments in the Palestinian state, and working with others to help it create a viable state. It's not going to be easy, but this is a population of talents, and as I mentioned, it's a population historically of small businessmen, small peasant farmers, not a population of terrorists. There has been terrorism, and it's been terrible.
Sure.
But there's something to build on there in terms of Palestinian civil society.
Okay, let's move to a couple of the spots in the region, Lebanon, and then to Egypt. And in Lebanon, we've witnessed since the last time we spoke, this Cedar Revolution. We saw the assassination of Harari. We saw ultimately, within the last couple of weeks, the Syrian withdrawal. What has happened there, and what can we expect there as well? I mean, clearly it looks like the Syrians have been marginalized at the minimum, but you tell me. Well, you know it far better.
Well, the Syrians have taken their army out, and they say they've taken their intelligence apparatus out. The second is questioned by some of the Lebanese, and they know better than we will, who is an intelligence agent that remains. But marginalized to an extent. But the fact is, Lebanon and Syria live cheek by jowl. Lebanon was hived off from that part of the Ottoman Empire, which was today referred to as Greater Syria. And the family ties, the business ties, are very very strong. Now, Syria overstayed in terms of its military presence and in terms of its it overplayed its hand, saying it could control every virtual thought of a political nature in Lebanon. And the Lebanese rebelled. The assassination of Hariri cost the region, not just Lebanon, a marvelous figure who who already had done a great deal to bring Lebanon back to life after that prolonged civil war. But he's gone, and now they have to rebuild. They have to keep building. But Syria will still be an important influence on Lebanon. It can't be escaped. You can't seal off Lebanon from Syria. So the question is, will Syria be more careful about throwing its weight around? And I think the world is going to be watching very closely.
What about Lebanon itself? Does Lebanon begin to reconstitute itself, as I remember growing up, as sort of a model in the Middle East of cooperation among Christian elements, Arab elements, etc.? Again, though, as we talked last week, you've got the Shia population there that there's this internal conflict within Islam. Talk about the prospects.
Well, the prospects are not bad. There is a history of accommodating each other's interests. Now, there was a hierarchy of interests that was symbolized at the top of the Lebanese state. The president had to be a Maronite Catholic. The prime minister had to be a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker, the third position, had to be a Shiite. That hasn't changed, and that doesn't have to change. The Syrians some years back were saying that that's antiquated and it should be the best man, it should be a meritocracy. Well, you know, none of the states excel in having meritocracies out there. So I think,
the way, but now go ahead.
Well, anyway, but the Lebanese, I think the memory of the Civil War, which was an incredibly bloody, miserable, 14 years long process, and now with the end of the Syrian occupation, they had to leave, and the Lebanese now have a chance to reconstitute. What's changing is that the Shia are coming alive politically. They were the third class. And now 40% of the population divided. Yeah, there are different camps there, but moving politically, has a dozen members in the Lebanese parliament today, still has the only armed militia left in Lebanon since the Civil War time. That has to be disarmed, and I think will be in the foreseeable time.
And move more and more into the legitimate political arena.
Right, and they're good at that. They've been very effective parliamentarians,
Absolutely.
by all accounts,
Absolutely.
in the Lebanese parliament.
Now we've got then Israel moving with the Palestinians, but in the sense also, if Lebanon is stabilized and Syria is in Syria, does that not enhance the prospects of an Israeli-Palestinian agreement, because the Israelis have far less to worry about in terms of security on that border? Does that make any sense?
Well, yeah, I don't think it's been a major security concern. It's
Right.
been a serious irritant, and the Israelis are always looking at what might happen.
Right.
They see thousands of missiles in the Hezbollah hands,
Right.
supplied by Iran through Syria, etc. You know the story. But they've been able to control the scene, and the Syrians have been restrained, and the Hezbollah itself has been very well disciplined, independent, I think, of Syria and Iran. As the days have gone on, they become more of a Lebanese force.
Okay, let's just move to one last stop quickly in the remaining minutes that we have, to Egypt. And they're the largest and largest of the Arab states. There's an upcoming election. Usually they choose their leader by referendum, but there's going to be an election. Now, Mubarak said he wasn't going to run, but it seems clear now that he's going to run, and if he runs, he's going to win. But there's still this, again, this tectonic shifts underneath the surface here. Could you just briefly talk about what's going on in Egypt?
Well, I thought one of the striking headlines of a couple of this year was that in our press saying Mubarak directs freer elections.
Right. Right.
So from the top down, you are going to be freer in your elections. Well, there has been a change. They will stand. The opposition candidates, and there are several out there, they will run, and they're not going to win. I think that's a given. The election's coming up in the next several months.
Right.
I'm sure Mubarak will win. He may not get the massive percentages that he's had in referendums in the past, but it's a step. It's a step.
What does it mean? What does this step mean? In order for this to occur, first of all, the elections and the running of these candidates, what is that signal? I mean, is this again just a mild thaw that's going, could we freeze? Is there any larger meanings in this?
The demand has been there in Egyptian society for years to get back to the interplay of political parties and not have just a national security leader from Abdel Nasser through Anwar Sadat to Hosni Mubarak.
Right.
It may be a step back towards that. We don't know yet.
Okay.
But it's also a bow in the direction of Washington, a nod in the direction of Washington. You say you want democracy. Hey, there's going to be freer elections. Did I make myself clear?
Okay. In the last 30 seconds that we have, we started the first show by asking the question that Foreign Affairs asked, an Arab Spring?
It could be. I hate to end the discussion by saying it's too early to tell, but it is too early to tell. There is a lot of ferment throughout the region right now. What shape it's going to be taken, it'll take the shape based on the roots in each individual sub-region. How fast they move, how far they get in terms of democracy, greater political participation. But the area is moving, and from within the area, the Arabs themselves are calling for that movement. It's not just an idea out of Washington, London, or anywhere else.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Great pleasure.